Today you'll see a woven blouse that only has 5 pattern pieces, and it can be a pattern you can get for free. Look at this gathered detail in the center front, touch of shirring, super easy. I'm showing you how to sew that detail on the neckline today, so stay with me. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and today I have the Annie Blouse from Sew Over It to share with you. A couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I got an email. I'm subscribed to their newsletter. In that email, they had a free pattern to share. So if you aren't subscribed to their newsletter, when you go into their website, you'll see a little pop-up screen and it tells you there to subscribe, and then you get this free pattern in your email. You can download it. I'll leave you a link down in the description box where you can click and it will take you directly to the form where you can subscribe if you want to, and then you can get this free pattern. It's not an affiliate link of any sort. They don't have an affiliate program. I'm not making any financial gain, I'm just doing free advertisement for them by sharing this pattern. It's a really simple style and woven, so why not? And this is a blouse that only has 5 pattern pieces, a front, a back. They're both cut on the fold. The front piece is slightly wider in the center because you have a gathered detail here. Regular set-in sleeves that reach up to your wrist, just a regular hem. And the blouse itself is relaxed fit. I think the most interesting feature of the blouse is this neckline. I think it's really delicate, really pretty. Another notion you need is a tiny bit of elastic thread for that shirring detail here in the front, because that's how that gather comes to be. It's just one row of shirring. You literally need like a tiny piece of elastic thread. This is not for knit fabrics. It really won't work with knit fabrics because of the construction techniques. It's really designed for lightweight woven fabrics. The drapier, the flowier, the better this neckline detail is going to look. Also, there's quite a bit of ease here, so if you use a structured fabric, it'll just look super boxy. So I think the best fabrics are rayon blends. I'd stay with the lightweight rayons. I wouldn't want to make this in a rayon twill, for example, because that is more medium weight. I think it would be a little bit too bulky. Rayon challis, crepe rayon, or just polyester crepe, chiffon, georgette, that sort of fabric is going to work out really nicely. The sizing is in UK sizing, of course. There is an equivalent in US sizing. Older patterns went from a size 8 to 20, I believe, UK, but lately they have quite a few patterns that go from a size 6 to a size 30 UK. That in US is equivalent to a size 2 to 26 US, and it'll go up to a 60-inch hip. There is quite a lot of ease in the pattern. You'll find about 6 to 7 inches of positive ease around the bust and hips. And because it's a straight sort of fit, there's not much shaping. There's about 13 inches at the waist. I would actually make the size that you're meant to make. I wouldn't size down because you're working with really lightweight fabrics. Lightweight fabrics, if there's any tension on any seam, they can start opening up and ripping. So when you do sew with these fabrics, I think the design needs to have that amount of ease so that your seams are always relaxed and there's no tension on them. Now, there are 2 separate size drafts. One that goes from the size 6 to the size 20 UK. I believe that is based on a B cup size. I tried to look and I really couldn't find a paragraph that confirmed that. But I suppose that most patterns were drafted for a B cup. That size draft won't have a bust dart there. Now there's another size draft from size 18 to 30 UK, and that one does have a bust dart incorporated in there. They are totally different. For example, size 18 in the draft without the bust dart has a few measurements for your body that are smaller than the size 18 on the draft with the bust dart, so they aren't really equivalent. I had a look, and the 18, which had the bust dart, the measurements were larger than my measurements everywhere, bust, waist and hips. So I just went over to the draft that didn't have a bust dart, looked at those measurements, and then chose my size there, and my size is 18 UK here. Because I assume this is drafted for a B cup, and I know I can do a really quick full bust adjustment, because I really want that dart there. I just went ahead and did a full bust adjustment. There is a bust line on the pattern piece on the front, so you know exactly where they wanted that bust height to be. I knew from measuring that the bust height was high for me. I also know that when I do my full bust adjustment and generate a dart, that is going to lower it a little bit. And I just drew my line where the bust line was as a reference to open up and create that dart there. You can see a photo. I have a really comprehensive video on full bust adjustments. If it's something that you don't want to do and you can't be bothered, I think you're missing out, because there are so many lovely patterns out there with really lovely design features. And maybe they just don't have your bust cup size, It's easy to do. Once you get the hang of it, it'll take you literally 5 minutes to cut it up, paste some paper, and you're done. To my front pattern piece, I just added 1/2 inch, which is going to take this pattern from a B cup to a C cup. It's generated a little bust-out on the side that's going to give me that shaping I need on the side. I'm always really keen to add that on because I know that its sides will hang smooth and I won't have drag lines. So it was really worth doing it for me. After doing the full bust adjustment, measure the sleeve and thought it was going to end up a little bit short for my arms. So I added 1.5 inches to the length of the sleeve. Easy peasy. About the sewing, the seam allowance in this pattern is 5/8 of an inch, which is I believe the seam allowance Sew Over It uses for all the patterns. And I have talked about that in the past. It's really not my favorite seam allowance. I think it's really big, takes up more fabric. It's hard to sew all the curves, but you know, it's doable. And I'm not going to go and trim away my pattern pieces to make the seam allowance smaller. I just can't deal with measuring all the pieces exactly and cutting them away. I just sew it with 5/8, but I don't enjoy it. We are going to see how to put this neckline together. It's really easy. It's different to other necklines, easier than what it looks, and you can do it for sure and get a really nice looking neckline. Little bit of gathers there. If you've never done shirring before, no worries, you can do it here. It's like that big and it's just one row, so you can do it. Let's see.
Don't you think this is starting to wear on me? You've been raining down like hail, I'm weak.
These are the pattern pieces for my Annie blouse. There aren't many of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The main pieces are the back, the front and the sleeve. The front and the back are both cut on the fold. You can see that I've used a border print and I've cut it along the grain line. So this stripe area was close to the selvage areas. So I'm going to make sure I have this stripe feature here on one of the side seams. This is the front and the vertical component will start at the middle of my shoulder, same as on the back. If you can see, if you measure here from the bottom, the front here looks longer than the back, but that's fine because I have a bust out there and then the length will be the same. Over here I have a small facing piece that will finish the center partially. This long piece was cut on the bias and then that's going to finish from there all around the back neckline to the other side of the front. So the front will be finished in 2 sections right there. And here is my sleeve piece. It's simple. It will have a normal hem. I've also got this vertical component of the print going down the front of my sleeves. When I was putting my pattern pieces, I made sure to have the single notch area right here on both sides. They are both the same, so I'm going to have that stripe going along the front of my sleeve too. I think it's going to look nice with that other stripe as well. This is a very small facing that goes on the front of the Annie blouse, but it's only partial. After reading how this comes together, I realized that there's a little raw area inside that I would not want to be there. So instead of cutting it there where it ends, I'm going to add 3/8 of an inch so I can fold that back and have a clean edge inside. So that is a change I've made. I've drawn it in pen there so I can see what I'm doing. And this is chiffon, so I'm using my rotary cutter, nice sharp blade. This is a type of facing that is not interfaced, and it's got to do with the fact that it's got shirring there later, so it needs to keep the softness and the lack of bulk. There's my facing, and I know I've cut it 3/8 of an inch longer there so I can finish that edge. There's only instructions for finishing the bottom edge there, but I also want this to be neat inside. This is the needle I'm going to use for this one. It's a Microtex 80, so it's a thinner needle, sharper needle, special for this type of fabric. The neckline on the front looks really wide, and it's because it's going to be gathered in the center with shirring, but the first step is always to stay stitch. I'm doing it from the shoulder to the center and then flipping the fabric and doing it from the other shoulder to the center. The seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch for this pattern, and I'm doing it at 1/2 inch. Stay stitch, just a regular stitch length. Next, I'm going to sew the shoulder seams, and I'm going to be doing French seams for this. 5/8 seam allowance is plenty of space to do it, so I'll do the first pass at 1/4 of an inch and then the second at 3/8. These are wrong sides together first. Okay, here is the first pass of the French seams at 1/4 of an inch. Now, because the second pass is going to be at 3/8, there's going to be enough space in there that I don't need to trim this away. 3/8 is bigger than 1/4 and this will be hidden inside. Now we fold the seam right sides together and we're going to have a closed edge. And now this is the one that I'm going to sew at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. It does make the sewing process a little longer because you're essentially sewing 2 seams per seam, but it's worth it for a fabric like this. It looks really delicate. It's really pretty inside, and I never regret it. It's really clean. This is how it's going to look on the outside. This is absolutely fine. The raw edge is hidden in there, and it's a really safe seam for a fabric like this. And it's the same way I'm going to sew the side seams also. I won't be sewing the sleeves with the French seam. I don't like French seams on curved areas. I think they just pull and are really uncomfortable. I'm about to sew the edge of the facing, and it'll be a single layer of chiffon. So I had a go at some scraps and trying to figure out the serger settings that would turn out nicer. And I have a few failed attempts, just fiddling with the tension, the stitch length, and the differential feed. I'm happy with how this looks because it's a really light woven. I've shortened my stitch length to 2.2 and also made the differential feed lower. I have it at 1. Gonna protect the edge of the fabric very well. This is the front neckline. I have the blouse right sides out, shoulder seams have been sewn, and it's a little difficult to see, but along this neckline you'll find 2 notches here. I've got red pins to mark those, and I also have a pin in the center front. And now we need to take this facing, and I've just cleaned the edges and place it along this up to that notch mark right there. Now remember I said I wanted to extend this by 3/8. That's because I want to fold this in like this. I'm gonna do just a straight stitch and just hold that down like that so that I have a clean folded edge right there. And then my clean folded edge, that is what is going to match that notch right there. So the facing goes onto the blouse right sides together there. And I'm folding this edge onto the wrong side. Okay, there is the facing pinned onto just this area of the neckline, right sides together. You can see that my fold here matches the notch. I marked it here on this side so you can see, and the same over here, there. And so it matches perfectly, everything is good. Now we need to sew this small piece on. The difficulty here will be that it's 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is never my favorite seam allowance. I think it's really big. So I'm just gonna have to be super careful to make this super neat from notch to notch. After sewing this little bit of facing, I'm just going to put a pin in the center back. Now we sew the binding piece so we can finish the neckline. I'm still looking at the blouse with the fabric right sides out. Now we have this long binding piece. It's quite wide, and it's because of the seam allowance really. So fold it lengthwise, wrong sides together like this. I'm also going to find the middle here. Okay, so there's the middle, and I'm going to match this to the back neckline at the center back. So remember, this is folded wrong sides together. So then this binding goes right sides together to the neckline, starting from the back and then pinning all the way to the front. Okay, here is the binding pinned all the way around, and here on the front you can see that the facing was sewn up to there. You need this binding to come over this facing and have about an inch of an overlap right there. That red pin marks where the facing stops under. I think the binding piece is supposed to be longer so that you can trim it off, although I don't see that in the instructions. Anyway, I'm just going to trim some off and have about 1.25 an inch of overlap there. So this will end up being behind the facing when this is finished, and same as on this side. You can see the pin marks where the facing is underneath, and from here I'm gonna leave about 1 inch there. Now we're supposed to sew this, pick up here, right there, start from that edge and sew around. But in this case I have 3 raw edges together, the binding is cut on the bias, the fabric is slippery. So I'm going to give it a quick hand baste first so that I'm sure that everything's going to be neat, and then I'm going to sew it. I've hand basted this with a large seam allowance, about 1/2 inch, so that I make sure that where I'm sewing, everything's going to be aligned here, all the raw edges together. I'm going to start a little further where the binding is, just on top of the seam that we did previously. Make sure that your seam allowances for the shoulders are pressed towards the back. And here's the other side. So I'll just sew a little beyond it, like 3/8 of an inch up to where that seam was, and finish there. Okay, in this stage, the instructions say that you can flip this inside and just roll the seam inside and top stitch. But I never want to skip understitching. I think it always just looks so much neater. So I'm going to push the seam allowance underneath the binding and sew on the edge right there. So seam allowance is right under the binding right here. Once we get to this facing area, it's the same thing, just understitch through all the layers. You can see you have a bit of binding under there, and the facing is going to cover that. Now this is why I did that little fold there. If I hadn't have done that, I would just have a raw edge there that would be visible on the inside, and it would weaken the garment. Okay, I've folded the binding and the facing to the inside, and I've given it a hand base so it can stay nice and put. And now here, where we have that little overlap, we need to measure about 3/4 inch this way from the edge of the facing. I put a pin there. From the fold, 3/4 inch. So what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch from this pin all the way around the neckline up to there, leaving this facing piece unsewn. This is the area where the shirring is going to go in a later step. So we're going to sew this down first, and I'm not going to back stitch right here. I'll just start and then knot it on the other side to make it neater. I'm just going to do it from the wrong side of the fabric because I can see what I'm doing. Here is my other pin, so I'm going to sew up to there. Here I have my shirring elastic, and we need such a tiny amount. In any case, I'm going to wind it by hand here. I'm not stretching it or pulling it or anything. I'm just winding it just as it is. It is a very small amount, and I can't believe I don't have white. I thought I did. I'm just going to have to do it in black, but a matching color is always ideal. I think I'll have more than enough with that. Put this in like any other thread. I'm just going to make sure I leave a pretty long tail right there. Here you can see where the top stitching stopped right there, and then we have the center that has the facing and that hasn't been sewn down yet. It is hand basted though, and here we have the pin of the other side. So basically we're going to sew from pin to pin with the same seam allowance that we were doing before. Now we don't back stitch there, we just start and then knot it to the back. The only difference is that now we have the shirring elastic at the bottom, regular thread on the top, and then when we do this one row of shirring, it's going to gather the center area right there. Here's my other pin. I'll make sure to stop right where the other seam starts. So that is how the center is going to look. Going to have that shirring there. I can see why this design has a facing in the center. It's because it's less bulky than the binding. On the binding you have more layers, so shirring on top of that I don't think would have worked very well. I'm just going to push this elastic to the back, knot it there, and that's the end of the neckline. Give it a press, and then all I have to do now is sew bust darts, side seams, and setting my sleeves. Here's my Annie blouse. This is a chiffon. This was sent to me as a gift from Kim, from Dorothy's daughter. She's one of my good friends. We are colleagues in the sewing YouTube channel area, and she sent me this as a gift a few years ago, and I finally made it up. So happy with it. The colors are different to what I typically wear, but I really love the dark green and the turquoise. It's got a beige background there, and this was a border print. I had a lot of fun cutting it because the stripy feature was all along the selvage. I think a lot of people would turn the fabric to the cross grain to have all that be at the hem, for example, which is something you can do. But I think the vertical component here was really, really wide, and I didn't want anything horizontal right at the widest part of my hips. It's just a visual thing. I prefer to just cut it normally on the normal grain line and have the stripe go vertical. So I have it on this side. It comes from the middle of my shoulder right there on this side, and also on this side over here on the back. I think it looks pretty, it gives it a different look, and I also have this on the front of the sleeve. Once you're done sewing this neckline, all the rest is super easy to put together. I really enjoyed the French seams. I never regret doing them, although I'll never do them on the armhole to sew in the sleeve because it's curved. I just find that a pain, the way it feels inside. It's really tight and it doesn't really mold to the curves that much because there's so much seam allowance tucked in there. I love French seams for shapes that are mostly straight, like shoulder seams and side seams, but sleeves, you'll never see me do that. Anyway, let me show you inside. Look, if you don't want to use chiffon, don't use it. It is tricky to cut and sew, and it's a little bit slippery. I just deal with it by hand basting a lot, and I'm sort of used to it. But I think rayon would be a really nice fabric that would be easier to work with, and then you don't have to do French seams. You can just sew and finish your edges. It would be faster to sew. I think French seams always look so nice inside, and it's really safe. You don't need to pull out your serger, although you can see that this is a serged edge and it's perfectly fine also. So it's up to you. I just like doing French seams when I can and I have the time and I'm motivated, but it's not a fast rule for me. I won't always do them, just when I feel like it, but I like doing them. I had that one critique of the construction related to the edge of this facing. I read the instructions about 1 billion times and there was just no mention of finishing that little side, and I knew there was going to be a raw edge right there. Imagine I'd left a raw edge of chiffon, how that would start unraveling and creating a hole down the line. That's why I added that little bit of extra length and folded it back, and I have a clean edge here on the edge of the facing. can see the serged edge there of the facing. This is where the shirring is. The black thread isn't really apparent, so I'm really glad I didn't have white. And then from there all around the other side we have the binding. You can see how narrow the binding ends up being. The pattern piece was super wide. You saw how wide that seam allowance is, and then you have to trim it away. That's why I just wish seam allowances were smaller to begin with. Here is the bust dart generated by my full bust adjustment. It's not a big dart, it does make a difference. Totally worth it for me to do it and generate that dart that's appropriate for a C cup. That is the hem. I've just folded it in by like 1/4 of an inch and then folded again and sewn, and I've sewn it. There are also French seams here on the sleeve, and the hem is just folded twice, narrow. Also, I've hand basted that when I was sewing because I just think it's easier for this fabric. Doesn't take much time at all. This is my Annie Blouse from Sew Over It. You can get it for free if you sign up for their newsletter. It's for woven fabrics and it only has 5 pattern pieces. The cutest detail here is that at the center of the neckline you have a small gathered area, relaxed fit with long sleeves. The length hits the full hip for myself and it's really comfortable. You can see that there's enough space there. Super easy to wear. The hem is straight. This is a normal long sleeve set in with a really easy to sew normal hem. At the bottom I folded it twice and top stitched a narrow hem, and up closer you can see this neckline. It's round. I really like the depth, and the soft gathers are really easy to sew with just one row of shirring. I'm really happy with how the shoulders and the sleeves fit here. It's a perfect width for me. I had a lot of fun with this border print chiffon, placing the vertical stripes on one side of the body and also having a stripe down the sleeves. I'm really happy I tried it. I think I will make another one with short sleeves because I like the style and the fit. It's really comfy and cute, and this neckline detail is really fun to sew and totally worth trying out for yourself for sure. Totally recommend you make this pattern. It's not difficult to put together. I think if one of your goals is to start getting more involved with woven projects, this is a good one to try. If you follow along what I've filmed for you, you'll be able to do it for sure. And you have a really nice blouse that's really easy to wear, easy to fit. You can use a nice print, and I think you'd be really happy. Totally worth subscribing to the newsletter for if you're not subscribed. You can get the pattern for free. That's all for now. Have a great day and happy sewing. I'll see you again very soon. Bye.